We need to put a few final thoughts on this whole issue of America's promise to stand up for freedom and stand up against communist expansion, totalitarian expansion in the post-war period, especially with respect to Vietnam. Keeping in mind that what we were trying to do was root out the bad guys and the enemies, one of the things that we see happen to people like Caputo as the war drags on is they begin to just kind of self-destruct mentally, have a hard time, having a firm grip on reality. But more than anything else, they're far more likely to engage in acts of violence, unjustifiable violence. If you read through chapter 18, this is a very important chapter, you'll come to the point where Caputo is charged with an unlawful killing of 2 Vietnamese citizens. If you read the chapter thoroughly, you'll find out that a few days before the 2 unlawful killings had occurred, his unit had lost a few men to ambush attacks, people that had gotten hit while they were out on patrol and later on died. So the fact that they were going on these missions day in and day out, and people were being shot in every corner from the jungle, and they were on hyper alert 24/7, and you're actually seeing your buddies die all around you, it really wore on people mentally, okay? Caputo and several of his men in the unit swore revenge, and that there would be something, some reckoning, if you will, for the fact that these guys had been killed in action. So what they did in short order is they went down to this village that they were very familiar with, and they tried to take 2 of these suspected Viet Cong. They were suspected allegedly within the Viet Cong network. Take them prisoner, take them back to base for interrogation. Long story short, one of them resisted, he was shot, the other guy tried to run away after his friend was shot, and the other guy running away was also gunned down. So two killings. It's later on discovered that not only had these people, had no connection to the Viet Cong, they were actually friends to the U.S. military in the sense that they had been quite helpful to what the Marines were trying to do in that particular village. I want you to ask yourself whose fault this is. 2 innocent lives had been cut short, and who's responsible for it? Let's see what Caputo has to say about it. I'm several pages deep into chapter 18, but in my edition this is page 322. He's talking about his court-martial case, and on the first full paragraph there it starts out, I was to appear as a witness. I was to appear as a witness for the prosecution. There was an absurdity in that, as I was to be tried on the same charges by the same prosecutor the following morning. But then, the fact that we had been charged in the first place was absurd. They taught us to kill, and had told us to kill, and now they were going to court-martial us for killing. Just like the nature of the mission, we're there to defend freedom, but to defend freedom we have to do all these things that are very anti-democratic. The Marines had been sent in there with an explicit mission to kill, and when they fulfilled that mission, the military actually came back and was trying them for war crimes. There's several parts in the book, and I'm not going to reference them right now, but the way that the soldiers that fought this Vietnam War were instructed to think about the enemy was that if it's dead and it's Vietnamese, then it's Viet Cong. In other words, when you have this war of attrition, you're just going to go out there and kill more bad guys than they kill of you. Just about anybody can be shot, and there's justice for shooting at any human target. Go over to page 323. I'm at the top of the page there, but there's a sentence that starts out, later, after I had time to think things over. Find that. Later, after I had time to think things over, I drew my own conclusions. The explanatory or extenuating circumstance was the war. The killings had occurred in war. They had occurred, moreover, in a war whose sole aim was to kill Viet Cong, a war in which those ordered to do the killing often could not distinguish the Viet Cong from civilians. A war in which civilians in a free fire zone were killed every day by weapons far more horrible than pistols or shotguns. Skip down a few lines. They were an inevitable product of the war. As I had come to see it, America could not intervene in a people's war without killing some of its people. But to raise those points in explanation or extenuation would be to raise a host of ambiguous moral questions. It could even raise the question of morality of American intervention in Vietnam, or as one officer told me, it would open a real can of worms. Therefore, the 5 men in the patrol and I were to be tried as common criminals, much as if we had murdered 2 people in the course of a bank robbery during peacetime. That's a pretty profound statement, that the morality of American intervention was suspect. This is a lieutenant in the Marine Corps saying that it was immoral to intervene in Vietnam. I'm going to leave that question, whether or not he's right, up to you. But I want you to think about this. Is there a difference between a war like World War II, where we're standing up against the spread of fascism, the domination of the world under a man like Hitler or Hirohito? Is there a difference between that kind of war and the Vietnam War, where we are intervening in basically what the Vietnamese people considered their own private affair, a civil war? Is that possible to produce any kind of outcome that either side's really got to be satisfied with? And that's a really, really helpful thing to think about when it comes to writing this paper. But for the time being, I'd like you to flip a few pages forward, page 332 to be precise. It's in the middle of that first full paragraph there. It's right in the middle. It starts out, I had declared a truce between me and the Viet Cong. Do you see that? I had declared a truce between me and the Viet Cong, signed a personal armistice, and all I asked for now was a chance to live for myself on my terms. I had no argument with the Viet Cong. It wasn't the Viet Cong who were threatening to rob me of my liberty, but the United States government, in whose services I had enlisted. Well, I was through with that. I was finished with the governments and their abstract causes, and I would never again allow myself to fall under the charms and spells of political witch doctors like John F. Kennedy. What started out so hopeful and so, energized with John Kennedy's inauguration speech ended very, very bitterly for these people that had bought into the idea that America was the light of the world, and we needed to go out there and basically spread our way of life to everybody that was pushing for their independence. There's one more thing that I want to reference with Caputo, and then I'm going to put one last concluding thought on this. On page 335, a few pages down from where we are right now, there's a paragraph that starts out, it was then that I had tried to do. Do you see that? The second sentence of that paragraph, the war, I said was unwinnable. It was being fought for a bunch of corrupt politicians in Saigon, the capital city of South Vietnam. Every American life lost was a life wasted. The United States should withdraw now, before more men died. The clerks, their patriotism unwavering, having never heard a shot fired in anger, looked at me in disbelief. I wasn't surprised. This was 1966, and talk such as mine was regarded as borderline treason. Sir, said Lance Corporal, if we pulled out now, then all of our efforts up to now would have been in vain. In other words, because we've already wasted thousands of lives, we should waste a few thousand more, I said. Well, if you really believe that not in vain crap, you should volunteer for a rifle company and get yourself killed because you deserve it. These were the products of America's foreign policy when it came to the Vietnam War. That war was being fought for a very abstract cause, as we pointed out. I want you to really push yourself when it comes to thinking about does the ends justify the means? Does standing up to communism in Vietnam justify the way in which that we're fighting this war? Furthermore, does it justify the loss of 60,000 American lives? And keep in mind, we're talking about a time period where the American government that was not only at the helm of this policy of standing up to communism in Vietnam, but actually later on drafting people, conscripting people against their will into the military and forcing them to go to Vietnam. Was that justifiable? The loss of American lives, let alone Vietnamese lives. Ask yourself that question as you write this paper. Now, the last thing that I'll ask you is the issue of democracy itself. I mean, basically the idea of democracy is the rule of the people. What good is democracy if you can't have the form of government that you want? In other words, at what point is, what we're trying to do in Vietnam no different than what we accuse the Chinese or the Soviet Union of trying to do, force a form of government, a governing system on them? We could see very clearly why freedom and democracy would work in Vietnam. They didn't. They subscribed to a different philosophy. Now, we can sit here and debate the merits of what they believed in all day long. But the simple fact of the matter is, you can have a point in governing systems like democracy where those governing systems actually become anti-democratic. And in my mind, that's very similar to what was happening in Vietnam. Even though we thought we knew what was best for that country, and we continuously tried to force it upon them, in the process, we became anti-democratic ourselves. We went in there, we killed people, our people got killed, and in the end, we weren't able to really justify but explain what we were doing. So I want you to roll over those questions in your head as you write this paper. And as always, if you have questions, please let me know.